Hi and welcome to Okerfest 2021. My name is Robert Chafe. I'm delighted to be your host for this online presentation this year. Before we get started, I just want to take the opportunity to acknowledge that we are meeting for Okerfest online this year. We are meeting from downtown St. John's, what is now known the island of Newfoundland, which of course is the ancestral homeland of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. We also want to acknowledge Labrador as the ancestral homeland of the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuavut and the Innu of Nitassinan. We are incredibly grateful to live, work, meet, create, discuss on these lands. So thank you for joining us. I'm really happy to welcome two friends and colleagues who I respect so much and whose books I've loved. And I can't wait to hear from these books and to discuss them a bit more. I'll introduce our guests today. Michell Butler Hallett is the author of 6 novels, including this Merlot, which was nominated for both the Relit Award and the Dublin International Literary Award. Her most recent novel is Constant Nobody, and she lives in St. John's. And Bridget Canning. Bridget Canning's debut novel, The Greatest Hits of Wanda Janes, was selected as a finalist for the 2017 BMO Winterset Award, the Margaret and John Savage First Book Award, the Newfoundland Labrador Fiction Award, and was longlisted for the Dublin International Literary Award. It is currently being adapted to film. Her second novel, Some People's Children, was a finalist for the 2020 BMO Winterset Award and the Thomas Raddall Award. Bridget is the recipient of the 2018 CBC Emerging Artist Award with Arts NL, and she lives in St. John's, where she writes and teaches. So welcome, Bridget and Michell.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's hear a little bit from these books, and then we'll have a chat. Maybe we'll start with Michell? With Bridget? I'm looking at Bridget and saying Michelle. Bridget?
So I'm going to be reading from my second novel, Some People's Children. The section I'm going to be reading from it is it's chapter 2 of part 2 of the book. And in this section, this is a coming of age story that takes place in the late 80s and early 90s. At this point, the protagonist, Imogen Tubbs, is living in St. John's in 1993, so this is post-COD moratorium. And the section I wanted to read kind of talks about like her life and the situation she's finding herself in after her first year of university. Nowadays, everything Imogen does is wrong. She gets a job at the university library. Her nan says, "So you come all the way to St. John's, and what do? Work in a library. You think you want to try something new." Imogen needs a language for a Bachelor of Arts and takes French. Nan, all you had was French since grade 3. Why not German or Italian or Chinese? Something different. Imogen points out how she has tried lots of stuff in this year of general studies, linguistics, psychology, philosophy. Nan, yes, and those grades show how hard you tried too. Imogen has tried to explain how there can be a range of good depending on the course. She was consistently getting 75% in philosophy and had been frustrated until a classmate gaped at her mark. "That's wicked. Dr. Monro never gives anything over 80. But Nan will have none of it. And Robert is her mother's boyfriend, didn't help anything this winter getting spidey about Imogen dropping political science past the refund date. You need to be able to manage your time and assignments, have a sense of your abilities, at least go over the syllabus and find out what they're demanding of you. You should be mature enough to do that by now." Maggie sighing in agreement, Nan's tongue clucking, grow up out of it. And it rots her because they are so right. This term, she and her friend Maureen took the second history course together because they heard the prof was cool and they could share a textbook and class notes. But Dr. Bridger applies a 15% participation mark and expects attention and discussion. And as they learned in class, she makes a point of pushing the women harder. Anytime a female spoke up, it was, "Explain, elaborate, what's your point? How do you do that?" While the men got, "Nicely done, Brian," or whatever. "I get what she's trying to do," Maureen says, "but Christ, why recreate a microcosm of society just because you can? I shouldn't have to be 30% smarter than every guy in the room just because that's how much more money they'll make than me." And when Imogen watches Dr. Bridger and all her expensive elegance and toned arms and ready references to everything that has ever happened in the world, she would rather be kicked than reveal the depth of her ignorance. What Imogen doesn't know could fill a stadium, could coat the moon. There are so many ways she knows nothing, like how she can rattle off the titles of her favorite novels, but struggles remembering the authors' names. How she mispronounced self-deprecating in front of front of Sherry. Ha! It doesn't rhyme with appreciate, Imogene. And all Imogene could do was shrug and say she never heard it spoken out loud before, which made Sherry laugh harder. In Bridger's class and in all her other classes, she does not want to open her mouth and expose the dirt road of her dialect, like the residence crowd does, arriving to class in January wearing shorts and pink college jerseys, blaring their Baymanness to all. No one needs to know where Imogene's from. No one needs to know anything about her. Imogene goes in the Coleman's, where it always feels like the fluorescent lights filter butter and sugar into the air. The cashier is one she sees regularly, but they do not greet each other. It gives her a stirring of melancholy relief. It's a pleasure to be anonymous, but a reminder that she is new and rootless and plain, like dandelion fluff. She is happy enough to be new in St. John's, to not be dragging around her childhood friends like so many townies she meets. There's a difference between being friendly and welcoming, Nan says, and St. John's could learn a thing or 2,000 about that. Imogene has conversations in class and in bars and in lineups, but it rarely carries over into an actual connection. She knows things are better now, but it's not what she's craved them to be. The selection, the abundance. What should she do this weekend? Who should she give her time to? There is still this limit of one or two things. She's grown up on one or two things. Sitting alongside Maureen and Sherry's conversations about high school, music class and theater arts and cheerleading and dance recital and proper soccer fields, swimming in pools, swimming lessons, French immersion. She is already so far behind and knows that nothing she knows has any importance. How to bake bread, how to chop wood on a windy day, how to beat the crap out of someone. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Beautiful. The dirt road of dialect. What was that line?
The dirt road of her dialect.
The dirt road of her dialect. Stunning. Thanks. Beautiful. Let's hear from Constant Nobody, Michell Butler Hallett.
British intelligence agent Temerity West is assigned to northern Spain during the Spanish Civil War to observe and report. She's undercover as a nurse at a clinic not far from Guernica. She knows that the Russian secret police, the NKVD, are in the country hunting members of a communist faction called POUM, because this faction does not take orders from Moscow. The clinic's doctor, Cristobal Zapatero, is a member of POUM. Cristobal has bicycled to Guernica on errands, and a Russian called Kostya Nikto has arrived at the clinic, needing medical attention. Temerity does not know Kostya's real name, but does suspect he's NKVD. Despite that, a quick and strong mutual attraction has risen. A second Russian, Kostya's colleague Misha, arrives. It's clear that they're looking for Cristobal, and NKVD rarely leave witnesses. Temerity ran from the clinic door and wrenched open the haversack she kept near her cot. She took her passport and tucked it into her brassiere, then flinched as a fist beat on the door. The plea came in Spanish. "Let me in!" She unlatched and opened the door, stumbling as a man wheeling a bicycle shoved her aside. Cristobal? Eyes wide and dark with fear and fatigue, Cristobal stared straight ahead as he dropped the bicycle, grabbed Temerity's arm, and hauled her into the little kitchen. He wore no shirt beneath his jacket, and he clutched something in his left hand as he whispered in rapid Spanish. Then he pointed back to the unlatched door. Temerity whispered back, Wait, I don't understand. The latch!" The door slammed open. She had no idea what the two Russians yelled. It didn't matter. Only the guns mattered. The object fell from Cristobal's hand and clattered at Temerity's feet. Rosary beads. Kostya aimed at Temerity. "Misha, get Zapatero outside." Misha grabbed Cristobal by the right arm, marched him off. Temerity stared at Kostya, recalling how he told Misha she could not speak Russian, so she did not speak it now. Instead, she spoke in Spanish. "Let me bring him the beads. Pick them up, then give them to me. Slow." She did so. Outside, Misha shouted at Cristobal, who shouted back. Kostya rubbed a bead between forefinger and thumbs, and then dropped the beads into the pocket. "Into the kitchen. Stand by the stove and face the wall." "No, please, move!" As they passed the table, Kostya picked up the sketchbook. Pages flipped. Then he shoved the book over Temerity's shoulder and held it before her face, open to the newest drawing. His voice sounded younger, less certain. "Me?" Mouth dry, she nodded. Fascinated by the portrait, he just stood there, right hand aiming his gun at the British woman's back, left hand holding a sketch of himself. Outside, Misha's voice rose as he demanded something. Then he fired, and Cristobal screamed. Temerity clenched her jaws and stifled her own cry. Kostya shouted over his shoulder, "What the barreling fuck, Misha, did you miss?" "You should get out here, Nikto." "Yes, I'd guessed that much." Staring at the Lichtrager and the tin of O-negative blood, Temerity mouthed the name to herself. "Nikto. It means nobody." Misha sounded flippant, even cheerful. "Thigh. He lunged at me. Anyway, he can't run now." Kostya shoved the sketchbook into a pocket. "Can't walk either." "Oh, then he'll be ready to talk to us." Kostya's hand clamped on Temerity's shoulder. The gun muzzle touched the back of her head. "Kneel." The floor scraped her knees. His boots squeaked as he took a few steps back. Then he fired. Wide. The concussion of the shot so close to her ears left Temerity deaf, and blood sprayed from the can labeled O-negative. Kostya kicked Temerity with the side of his boot just hard enough to knock her off balance. As she fell, she rolled onto her back, and she saw spatter stains on both the walls and Kostya's clothes, and an expression on his face she could not read. He gestured with his free hand, and his mouth worked. English. "Stay down. Stay down." Then he snatched several rolls of bandage and ran.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks. I was really excited to talk about both of these books because in many ways they're very, very different books. We have Bridget's Some People's Children, which is set in Newfoundland, is obviously not without its dramatic elements, but really funny, really beautifully crafted sense of humor through it. And yours, as we've just heard, carves this path of like drama and intrigue and tension that's kind of unrelenting through the entire thing. And so in thinking about what similarities exist between the two, I was weirdly drawn to the Bechdel test. Do you guys know the Bechdel test?
Yeah.
Alison Bechdel is an American cartoonist who a feminist lesbian American cartoonist who developed this test for media, films, television, that essentially is about a feminist lens on work, and how do you look at a work, does the central female character exist outside of the opinions, influence of men? What aspects of the character resonate in the absence of men? And most things actually fail it. And what's interesting about these two books is that not that they pass that test, but they defy it. I would love to hear what Alison Bechdel has to think about these books, because both of these books are, the women in these books are defined by the men around them and what the men have done to them and are continuing to do to them. But they have agency, and they defy that notion of what Bechdel, I think, would cast a female character in that situation to be. And I'd love to hear you talk about the relationship between the men and the women in these books, and how these women are instilled with such agency, even though the situations in the books at first glance wouldn't seem to give them that kind of agency. Bridget,
That's great. I was just, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the Bechdel test, and I think one of the things in that test is that when it's applied to film, is that if there's two women and they have a conversation about something that's not a man, about a topic that's not about a man. And I sometimes think about it when I rewatch old movies that I liked when I was young. I'm like, oh,
it's really rare.
Nothing. There's none of the women even have a conversation that doesn't involve, something that's happening with a guy. Like, oh my God, how are we going to get out of here? Or something like this. So that was interesting. I mean, for my book, because it takes place, it covers. Imogen Tubbs is the protagonist. It starts, I believe, in 1989, so she's 11. So it covers 9 years of her life. From when she's 11 until she's about 20, and of course takes place in the 80s and early 90s, and in a rural area in Newfoundland. And I think it was kind of impossible to really make it a pure, if we're going to apply those type of tests to it, because so much of her life is so ingrained in this kind of, we talk about being politically correct, but that time of, the 80s and 90s being very misogynistic time, a very time of people. I just remember growing up and the casual racism, sexism, homophobia that just kind of was in your everyday language that you heard. So I think it's kind of, and of course when the story starts when she hears this little snippet of what might possibly be the real truth about who her father is, which means, she starts realizing that she's kind of a product of gossip, that who she's been told is her father is not what anyone else believes. So of course that being kind of it ends up being a reflection of who she thinks she is. Like, is she this person who everyone is kind of connecting her with this man down the road who is kind of a despised person,
right.
or is she or is she kind of does she have this mysterious father who in many ways could be just as bad
Right.
as that? So and of course the double standard with how people talk about the way she's kind of realizing as she does get older and is listening to the way people are talking about her mother,
Right.
And that relationship with that. So I think in that way then she does have agency, because she can't fight the kind of the world that she's in, but is forcing her to kind of ask all these questions about who she is in
Right.
that world.
Right. Michelle, you have a character that's actually captive. Right?
Yeah.
It's actually a woman who's captive to the man.
I wanted Temerity to be something of a stealth protagonist. So much, and I felt this real struggle when I was writing it, because so many of the novels I've read and studied are male-centered. That's the traditional where we're coming out of. And she is up against a tyranny. She's up against patriarchy at home in Britain, and she is up against toxic masculinity gone mad in the form of the Soviet tyranny. So I certainly have to address all those concerns. The thing is, Kostya seems to be the one in charge. He seems to have all the agency, having brought her to his apartment and made all kinds of decisions. But Kostya spends most of the novel reacting to things. It's Temerity who acts.
Right.
And it's she does have supreme agency, which has not been granted to her. It has in a way in that she's a fully trained SIS operative. But she just has, she's far less damaged than Kostya is. And what Kostya has been damaged by is trying to adapt to this hideous, toxic masculinity.
Right.
So in some ways it looks like Kostya is the main and even the title character. He's really not.
Right. No, I could see that.
Yeah.
It resonates in the work totally, and
Grand.
it's, and the fact that Temerity is her name.
Yeah, well.
that he eventually finds out in the book, of course. The other thing that I think is really, I think this kind of is a uniting factor about all work, could be said, but I think it really resonates in both of these books, is the notion of identity. And in Bridget's work, as you were just talking about, this is someone who is questioning and actively searching for who her father might be, against all kind of societal suggestions otherwise. And in your book, you have someone who is levels of identity, concealed identity. Like I was just saying, the two characters who become very well known to each other over the course of the book kind of find out who each other are only at the end in terms of identity. And I guess I'd just like to hear your thoughts on the identity of these characters, and whether that was something quite conscious in the work or something that evolved as you were developing the story.
Both, I would say. I knew that when I started this book that I wanted to write about someone growing up in a small community where everyone knows you, or everyone believes that they know you. So you're kind of constantly being told who you are. If you kind of break out and do something different, people react to it, people comment on it, and things like that. So for Imogene, when that kind of starts happening, it's like, oh, this is what people believe I am. And it's something that she didn't really, it has been hidden from her. She's kind of going, fighting back and forth, this kind of tug of war in between, who she is, who people are telling her she is, and who she's afraid she is. So that, and I think that's kind of, so as I kept going through the book, I kept thinking about, because there's times, it's a coming of age story. She's a teenager. She makes huge mistakes and errors and bad choices and all these kinds of things, errors of judgment. And I was thinking about that, how that is so important, I think, for when we are creating our identity. We form who we are more once we're teenagers. That's when we learn more from mistakes and rewards. Mm-hmm. So when she is kind of doing things like, I don't know, breaking into someone's house and stuff like this, when she's a teenager, she's thinking about how, is that her choice, or is this something that she has inherited because her father might be a despicable person?
Right, right. We're running out of time, but I do want to hear you have talk about the notion of identity in your book a little bit. And
I think Temerity's sense of identity is much firmer than Kostya's ever is. He is orphaned, and he's about 12, 13 during the Russian Revolution, ends up changing his name through a clerical error to Nikto, which literally means nobody. So he thinks of himself as nobody. In order to adapt and survive to the regime, he has to turn off a lot of his humanity. Otherwise, he can't kill people.
Right.
You can't kill a person whom you think is as much a human as you. His humanity keeps popping up, and it would get him in trouble, but I think that's a very hopeful sign.
Right, right. And was that conscious? Like, did you set out to write a book about concealed identity? Was that
in part, yes.
Yeah, in part, yeah. Yeah, and what was the other part? What was the other driving force of this book for you? Just to throw that on you.
Someone like Temerity, a British woman in the 30s who was able to live her own life. And of course, the main reason she's able to do that is that she comes from a very privileged background.
Right.
If she'd been a working class girl, her life would have been very different.
Right. I could talk about these books all day. I absolutely adore both of them. They're such incredibly strong and beautifully crafted characters and worlds. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for tuning in. We'll be back with more Ogrefest 2021 with more sessions and more authors, but for now we'll leave you with a performance from Andrea Monro.
This is a song about Jumbo the elephant and his travels. And how I think he must have thought, or might have thought, who knows. Click clack, I got the train to take me back, but it's not like you think. A mile of carts, a world apart, for what it's worth, they say. It's the greatest show on earth. I hear the lions roar sometimes above the rumble of the railway lines. They're not meant to roam this way. We stop in another town, we set it up, we tear it down. But the children sometimes stay till it's time to go again. I hear the bones calling me, but I'm not sure where they might be. I haven't passed them yet. Maybe it's time to forget. 'Cause 32,000 miles I've gone in a railway car alone. Well, lately I've been staring at the sky, just wondering what I'm worth. They say my life will always be this way, but I feel differently, of course. Sometimes when I'm in between Tonopah and New Orleans, and the sun, it gets so warm, reminds me of where I was born. When we get to San Antone, the cowboys hitch a ride back home. They've been following the moon on high. The stories make the miles fly by. 'Cause 32,000 miles I've gone in a railway car alone. Canada has always been my favorite place. Just miles and miles of empty space, and all those little towns to mark the pass of time. I like the cold north wind blowing down the line. I always knew that the day would come. All this working wouldn't be any fun. I know I'm not old, but lately I've been tired. Now there's a train a-comin', and I'm the only rider. 32,000 miles I've gone in a railway car alone. 32,000 miles I've gone in a railway car alone.